The 2024 NFL Draft has now come and gone, and what used to hold such great value to all Cleveland sports fans really doesn't have that much significance nowadays. However, I do think it's important that we do go over this draft class as a whole, considering that there are a couple of pieces that I like and could potentially have an impact on our future. I don't want to give out any type of grades on this year's draft, considering that you only had 6 picks and 4 of them being on day 3. So it's not really fair to be able to give out a grade on this type of draft. Looking into this year's draft, there wasn't really any glaring needs in terms of the starting positions for the Browns. However, I do think that there was a couple of positions that did need a little bit of help. When you look at the front 7, that was definitely one group that I think a lot of people agreed that we need to start building up a little bit more on the depth in terms of at least the linebackers and defensive tackles. I definitely think that with Shelby Harris potentially becoming a free agent next year and also being 33, as well as Dalvin Tomlinson being a little bit older, I think definitely looking at defensive tackle was going to be something that needed to be addressed, as well as looking at like the linebackers. As obviously you have JOK, but in terms of that, he had a couple other free agent pickups. I don't know really how that one's going to sort out, so I think that was probably the biggest need. The last position that I think the Browns really needed to address was the wide receiver room in this year's draft. I understand that Jerry Jeudy just got that big extension. However, Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore are both set to be free agents after this season, so being able to find some more depth would be critical. So this leads us into our first pick, which was in round 2, pick 54, Michael Hall Jr. So a lot of people were expecting Andrew Berry to potentially move off of this pick or even go with an offensive tackle. However, he ended up staying put and going with Michael Hall Jr., the defensive tackle from Ohio State. Standing at 6'2", 280, Michael Hall was definitely a guy that was a little bit undersized heading into this year's draft. However, he had a very productive 2023 season with the Buckeyes. He ended up finishing with 22 QB hurries on the year, which is very impressive for an interior guy. The first thing that you'll notice off of Mike Hall Jr.'s tape is the fact that he is very explosive coming off the line. His main calling card is his ability to get after the quarterback. Like I said before, he had 22 quarterback hurries on the season and only 2 sacks on the year. However, he does a phenomenal job of creating pressure on the interior line, which is very important, especially nowadays in the league. I know at times he struggled a little bit in the run game. However, I have full confidence that Jim Schwartz will be able to utilize him in many different ways, especially because Michael Hall Jr. is very aggressive, which kind of fits into the scheme of Jim Schwartz there. So I'm very excited to see his career blossom with the Cleveland Browns. But for round 3, we're going to switch over to the offensive line and talk about Zach Zinter, the offensive guard from Michigan. I was a little bit confused by the Zach Zinter pick. I didn't see anything about them potentially talking to him at the combine or anything like that. I don't know. I just didn't really expect it. I don't really have too many red flags for Zinter. He was a former All-American at Michigan in 2022. But if you did watch the Michigan versus Ohio State game, he was the offensive lineman that went down during the middle of the game for Michigan. He ended up breaking his tibia and his fibula in that game, and he was out for the remaining of the season. But right now, apparently, he talked a little bit at the combine and said that the recovery's going well, and he's just trying to build up some strength in that leg now. If you've seen this man play, I mean, he is massive. He stands at 6'6", 322, which is absurd to see from an offensive guard. Usually at that weight and size, you're most likely going to be on the offensive tackle side of it, but Zinter played guard for basically his whole career at Michigan. However, my main concern with Zinter is the fact that he doesn't have the best movement skills in terms of footwork or just athletic ability in that sense. When you have that size, you're usually playing offensive tackle. However, I think that's part of the reason why he was kicked into the guard position there, because the movement wasn't good enough to be able to handle edge pressure. So this is a little bit worrisome considering that you already have a little bit of movement issue, and now you're going to throw on a leg injury on top of it as well. Getting a little bit scary in that sense. But I honestly don't think it's too big of an issue considering that he isn't going to be starting anytime soon. You already have Wyatt Teller and Joe Bitonio there. So Either way, I think he's probably just going to be a solid depth piece for the Browns moving forward. And with the amount of injuries that offensive line has dealt with, I think it's safe to have a guy like Zinter to at least back up those top guys. And now heading into round 5, we get to stay on the offensive side of the ball with Jamari Thrash. Jamari Thrash might be one of my favorite picks that Andrew Berry made in this year's draft. The wide receiver from Louisville wasn't as productive in 2023 as he was in 2022. However, he still ended up having 848 yards on the year on 62 receptions as well as 6 touchdowns. The reason why I love this pick so much is the fact that Jamari Thrash has an ability that most Cleveland wide receivers don't necessarily have, and that's the yards after catch. At the beginning of last season, we saw some glimpses of Coach Kevin Stefanski kind of implementing some unique plays for guys like Elijah Moore. Maybe it was like a jet sweep or using him out of the backfield, anything like that, kind of like a gadget role. And that's exactly what I think Jamari Thrash could potentially bring to the Browns. In his final season with the Louisville Cardinals, he had 6.7 yards after catch per reception and also forced 17 missed tackles as well. He ran a 4.48 at the combine, and you can definitely see on tape his ability to create more offensive production outside of the catch. Even though Jamari Thrash does have a lot of speed, I don't necessarily think that he's going to be a deep threat for the Browns. He only had 5 deep catches last year and a 15.8% contested catch rate, which kind of makes me feel like he's going to be more of a gadget guy in the NFL. He also did have 8 drops last season, which is a little bit concerning. However, there are rumors that he potentially was dealing with an injury during the later part of the year, and that's where you started to see a lot of the drops happen. I really don't know how much you're going to see Jamari Thrash in year 1. However, I definitely think that the writing's on the wall and that this is potentially Elijah Moore's replacement. With the last 3 picks, we're going to move over to the defensive side of the ball, starting off with Nathaniel Watson. Round 6 is finally where we see Andrew Berry take a shot at the linebacker position, and he ended up going with Nathaniel Watson, the linebacker out of Mississippi State. I thought that this was a interesting pick, considering that my guess is he's going to be more of an early down linebacker in the league if he does reach his full potential. Watson did pretty well in the run game at Mississippi State, posting a 70.6 run game grade from PFF. He also did pretty well at getting after the quarterback as well too. Saw that a little bit in his film there. But athletically, he's not the best. He ended up getting a 5.03 relative athletic score, which if you look at the comparisons of all the other linebackers, not ideal. Either way, though, if you do end up seeing Nathaniel Watson on the field for the Browns, it's most likely going to be in early down situations trying to stop the run. Now we'll look into the 7th round picks, starting out with Myles Harden. It's truly not an Andrew Berry draft if he's not taking a cornerback at some point, and this year it was Myles Harden, the cornerback from South Dakota. Myles Harden is not a guy that really lit up the stat sheet. He had a 66.7 completion percentage when targeted, as well as a 95.6 passer rating while targeted as well. So not ideal. However, when you start to look at the late day 3 guys, you're not going to find dudes that are lighting up the stat sheet. They're most likely going to be going earlier. So when you look at some of these 7th round guys or these 6th round guys, I really like to look at some guys that have a particular trait, and Myles Harden does actually have that with his athleticism. He ended up posting an 8.3 RAS score while running a 4.5 and a 10-yard split of 1.52. So I love that Andrew Berry took a shot with an athlete like this because you could potentially mold him into a good cornerback. So when you're sitting in the 7th round and you have a guy like Myles Harden, I think it's worth taking a shot considering that you could potentially mold him into something. And last but not least, I want to talk about Jowon Briggs, the defensive tackle from Cincinnati. Jowon Briggs had probably one of the most unique profiles that I've seen in a while. In 2022 at Cincinnati, which was probably his best year, He ended up playing a lot over the A gap there. But then what was really strange about it was in 2023, he mainly lined up off the tackle, which at his size at 6'1", 313, I don't know why they would do that. So with him trying to play in that new role, yeah, you're obviously going to see a dip in production. But either way, I think Briggs would be a pretty fun experiment. He ended up getting a 7.26 RAS score, which shows off his decent agility for his size as well as his pretty solid strength. I think if Briggs ends up carving out a role with the Browns, it would definitely be primarily as a two-down defensive tackle where you would just kind of need him to stop the run. And lastly, there's one other name that I wanted to mention. He did not get drafted by the Browns. However, he did sign as an undrafted free agent, and that's Javon Cohen, the offensive guard from Miami. I think he's definitely one of the important undrafted free agents, considering that the Browns did bring him in for a visit earlier in the draft process, and as well as Zinter dealing with that injury, he's definitely another rotational piece that you could see landing with the Browns and sticking on the team.